Hi, all. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Breed. I'm Brad Anderson. This is episode 2. This episode will be talking about population genetics and its role it plays in dog breeds. I am not a geneticist, but I take population genetics pretty seriously in the way I think about dogs and dog breeds and breeding in general. And I think it's something that's important for people to understand. So I wanted to do this episode first and kind of give a basic overview. Hopefully you can hear me. It's windy again here today. First, let's do some housekeeping. A reminder, these are my opinion. I only share facts if I'm, 99% sure they're true facts. However, feel free to correct me if I get something wrong. You can do that in the comments on YouTube or send me a message at bradanderson.org or whatever. But keep in mind, any negative comments I'll delete because I'd like for this podcast's YouTube page to be one of the only places on YouTube where there's actual positive comments and not constant negative trolling. So if you guys could help me do that, that'd be great. All right, next on my list is redactions and corrections from the previous episode. I don't have any of those since that was an introduction. I will say that I had some feedback that I don't move around enough and I wear too much black, and I shouldn't talk about my faults. So I'll address those by saying I wear a lot of black. Today I mixed it up and I'm wearing a green shirt, but I wear a lot of gray and black, and I'll try to not wear too much black. And as far as moving around and stuff, I'm not really a talking head kind of guy, so this is about as good as you're going to get from me. I want this to be more like you're having a conversation with me than I'm, preaching to you or something like that, or trying to sell you something. And on that note, another comment I had was that people would like to hear me talk about my program and my dogs and things like that. For some reason, I don't really like talking about my personal stuff and my personal plans. I don't know why that is. I've never been good at selling myself. And so what I was thinking is what I'll do is in the beginning of each podcast, I'll add a little update about me and what's going on. So here's my update. We have a litter of Dogo puppies. It was a unplanned litter. Che and Mia live at my friend's place in Texas. However, he's a geologist and is on a contract job in Phoenix and has had someone taking care of the dogs. And Mia got into heat, and Che ninja'd himself into the kennel and got Mia pregnant. So we have another Che Mia litter. They're nice puppies, so no complaints there. But I mean, if you follow me on social media, you'll probably see pictures of those little guys. They're here now because my friend Mark, he the timing was bad. He had to go to Peru for some business, and so right when they were being born, or right after they were born. So they were born there, and then we brought them here. And it works out well because, Mia knows us, and, we certainly are used to raising puppies. So it was an easy transition for Mia and didn't stress her too bad, so that's good. Smokey, we're expecting a litter from Smokey here any day now. I'm guessing probably this weekend. She was bred to my West Siberian Leica, Ike Jr. I think this will be a fantastic litter. I'm excited about it. I'm kind of shivering. It's cold out here. Sorry if I seem like I'm shivering. Okay, so let's get to population genetics. Oh, and the barking and nonsense is Picasso, Ghazi, and we call her Kai, but her name is Cairo. She's our Alano female. I don't think I'm saying that name right, but that's how I say it. She's a nice dog. And then Ghazi is our Congo, and Picasso is our Ibizan Hound. Alright, so let's get to business. Population genetics is a subfield of genetics that deals with the genetic differences within and between different populations. And so, when you're thinking about dog breeds, a dog breed is a population. And then those breeds are divided up into subpopulations, in different countries, different lines, and so on and so forth. So population genetics applies pretty strongly to dogdom. First subject I want to talk about is diversity. Dog breeds are I should change that. Most dog breeds are a closed population. You can think of a dog breed as being locked on an island where there's no new genetics coming in to that breed and none leaving. Certainly there's people crossing out there like me. But generally speaking, by and large, there's no new genetic material being added to dog breeds. On occasion, some breed clubs and kennel clubs will open up their stud book and allow for outcrossing. And in those cases, that's amazing that they do that. But most don't do that. In the dog breed world, purity is held, in my opinion, higher than it really should be held. So, because of that lack of diversity in dog breeds, things like inbreeding are exceptionally dangerous. And unfortunately, in dog breeding, inbreeding is very, very common. It's usually called line breeding, but line breeding is inbreeding. By definition, it is a form of inbreeding. So I've gotten into arguments online with people who are like, line breeding's not inbreeding, it's different, but it's not. It's a form of inbreeding. And you can figure that out simply by saying, comparing it to humans. Like, if a breeding is being done, and you're like, is this inbreeding? Just ask yourself, is that too close for humans to breed, in your opinion? And if the answer is yes, then it's inbreeding. So like, is it okay for my brother to have an offspring with my grandmother? Probably not, because that's inbreeding. In the dog world, that's called line breeding, though. And it's very, very common. And frankly, it's a very powerful tool. I mean, it's used in livestock as well. Not as heavy-handedly as in dogs, but in livestock, at least in cattle, I know oftentimes they'll use one bull that sires, calves from lots and lots of heifers or cows, and they'll breed that cow back to its offspring. They'll breed that bull back to its offspring, and they do that to see what's produced. Because when you inbreed, you're essentially multiplying the genes, like you're compounding the genes. So if a dog throws, a nice ear set and you inbreed on that dog, you're probably going to continue to get that nice ear set. And that's why dog breeders love line breeding so much, because it helps produce a consistency in your litters. You know what to expect. But as you will learn moving forward in this, it can also be very damaging to a dog breed. All right, let's talk about outcrossing now. A lot of people in dogdom refer to outcrossing as, like, I have my line of dogs, and I'm using this other this other line of dogs to outcross to. That's technically not outcrossing. Outcrossing would be using a completely different population, a completely different breed. But as I mentioned before, that's not something the dog world is okay with. So it's rarely done. You can kind of walk this line of inbreeding, but still including diversity by crossing very inbred lines to other very inbred lines, and that will invigorate your breeding program, your lines, but that isn't really adding diversity to the dog breed at all. And frankly, any line breeding, any inbreeding is removing diversity from a dog breed. You can think of that as like there's math out there. I don't know it off the top of my head right now, but for every like male you remove from a breeding program, you shrink the population by X number, and that X number is derived from the size of the population, the number of breeding males, the production, and so on and so forth. So it obviously varies by breed. So that's something important to remember. Removing dogs for whatever the reason from the gene pool, from a breeding population. Gene pool is not technically the right term. From a breeding population is shrinking the breeding population. Every time that happens, every time you inbreed, you're shrinking the breeding population because you're removing diversity. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people don't understand. By the way, today I'm drinking a beer. This is a Java Stout from Santa Fe Brewing. Okay, so next on my list, I have notes. That's what I'm reading. And I'm not using my phone this time because I think you guys might have heard that weird beep, beep, beep sound. I think that was my phone interfering with the mic. Actually, come to think about it, I'll just turn it off. How about that? I don't need it right now. There we go. Because I don't like that feedback stuff. And on that note, I'll say that I'm going to continue to try and improve the video and the sound quality and everything. I set up a little place inside because I didn't think I was going to do this outside because of the wind. But it's died down a little bit now. But I have a little place, so I'll probably start doing these inside from time to time, especially as it gets colder out. Today it's 50 degrees, so it's not too bad. All right, anyways, back to the subject. Let's talk about breed clubs and registries and how they play a role in population genetics. So the way it usually works, and by no means am I a show dog expert, I'm not, or a kennel club or registry expert, but this is what I have come to understand. So, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but there's kennel clubs, and then a kennel club has a breed club. And the breed club essentially defines the standard for the breed and defines, or I should say, it registers the dogs in the breed club. So the dogs are registered through the breed club to the kennel club. So let's use an example. UKC. If you want UKC papers on, let's say a Shiba or a Shikoku or a Dogo or whatever, you generally have to go through the breed club first, and then you get your papers from the kennel club. Excuse me. The kennel club is a registry in and of itself. There are registers out there, like the FCI, which are just purely registries. They're not clubs. But that's kind of off the subject. So it's not 100% the registry's fault or the kennel club's fault if there's heavy inbreeding or or if the stud book is closed, it's really usually more the breed club's fault. And at that, it's really the breeders, individual breeders within that club, that should be standing up and trying to push breed clubs to be more open and less selective in order to increase population genetics within a breed. However, unfortunately, there's a lot of politics at play in there, and more often than not, if you even so much as suggest outcrossing to another breed, you get blacklisted and you then can't register or compete in any of the club's stuff. So that's why there's really no forward progress in those breed clubs, because they pretty much hold the key, the door to events and registering your litters and so on and so forth. So you kind of have to play nice with them, and unfortunately, playing nice with them in most cases means, not suggesting something that the general population isn't going to agree with, like outcrossing to another breed, or reducing or changing the standard to be a little more flexible, and things like that. All right, so let's go on to what's called the founder effect. The founder effect is prevalent all over dogs, but I don't think people really realize it. And the perfect example of the founder effect is the American Akita. Everyone talks about the American Akita coming to America and being crossed with German Shepherds, and that's why they look the way they do, but that's factually incorrect. The Akita in Japan was crossed with Western breeds before World War II. So any German Shepherd blood in the Akita came with the Akita to America. If you were to take a snapshot of the Akita in Japan before World War II, they would look like the American Akita looks today. After World War II, all of the various Japanese breeds were broken up into individual breeds and standardized by the Nihon Ken Honzonkai, also called Nippo. And the Akita was one of those. And so what you have is the Americans get their Akita and they start breeding one direction in a standard for the Akita. Meanwhile, the Japanese form their kennel club and start, or their preservation society, I should call it, and start breeding the other direction. And so you have two separate populations that no longer really resemble each other, but are derived from the same original population. The reason why that's important for the founder effect is because it's the perfect example. All of the dogs brought over to the United States, during World War II by Americans that formed what is known now as the American Akita, all of those dogs that came over originally looked similar to what the American Akita looks today. So that's why it's called the founder effect. And there's countless other examples of this. I mean, there's tons. I can't even list them all, and I'm not going to. But that's the founder effect. Essentially, the foundation dogs that started the breed, started a population, all of that population resembles the founders. All right, so let's move on to introgression. Introgression is essentially, I don't have the exact definition right here, so I might botch it, but it's essentially bridging the gap between two closed populations. So let's say you had a bunch of wolves that lived on an island, and then you had wolves that lived on the mainland, and they don't get to interbreed. So the island wolves form their own population and breed amongst themselves and start to look different than the ones on shore, and they behave different too. So if you wanted to reinvigorate the dogs on the island, or I'm sorry, the wolves on the island, you could take wolves from the mainland and bring them over to the island and allow them to breed among the island wolves, and hopefully add some new genetic material and help revitalize that population. So that's what introgression is. Introgression, I think using the term, to be honest, I think using the term introgression in dog breeds is technically probably incorrect, but because they're all dogs, and the breeds are kind of manufactured. The populations are manufactured because we created the breeds. However, I use the term because it's the best way to explain what, for example, I did with the Kai Ken. The Kai Ken in America had become very inbred and bottlenecked, and there was no new dogs coming in to the population. Now, in respect to the breeders that were here before me, they did a great job with what they had. I think that the breed started with just 11 dogs and it grew to thousands, and they did a pretty good job of not inbreeding them into the ground and destroying them. However, it became really clear to me that the dogs needed help, and so I made it my mission to bring dogs from Japan, which you would call the country of origin. So I wanted to bring dogs from Japan into the American population. I call that introgression. And I did that, and we have seen some, very promising results of revitalizing the Kai Ken in America, thanks to the imports. And I'm not the only one that imported; other people did, but I think I was the one that really started the push for it. And we imported a lot of Kai Ken, but so that's an example of introgression. And as you can see, that's a way that you could add diversity to a closed population by taking examples of a breed from another closed population and bringing them over to this closed population and breeding them into the population to essentially create better diversity. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be, they're not truly diverse at that point, but it's better than what it was before. And so hats off to anyone importing and doing that type of thing. The internet has made it so much easier for people to import, which is fantastic in my opinion. Because the more we can move blood between different countries, the better these rare breeds are going to be. In some cases, you could argue in like a Labrador or something like that, something with a huge population, you could actually hurt the breed by bringing dogs from another country in, because you don't know how much they health test or things like that. However, for small breeds, for rare breeds with small populations, I think it would be a bad idea to use that excuse not to do it. Because by definition, a healthy population is a diverse population. The more diversity you have in the population, the more healthy the population as a whole will be. All right, so let's move on to some acronyms. COI and COR. COI stands for coefficient of inbreeding. It's essentially an algorithm that looks at all of the dogs behind a specific dog, or all of the all of the relatives, couldn't come up with that word, all of the relatives behind a dog and its pedigree, and then, does some math and spits out a percentage of inbreeding. The coefficient of inbreeding is important, but it's a little deceptive. A lot of people, hang their hat on good COIs, but don't realize that you could produce a really low COI by breeding really inbred dogs. And I'll explain how. For one, it's based off the pedigree. And so if the pedigree is only 4 generations, that's all the data you have to calculate the COI. Because probably there's not that much inbreeding in just 4 generations. Save for bulldogs or something like that. If you took that same dog and then did a COI on an 8 generation pedigree, you'll see the COI probably go up. And the further you go back, the higher it's going to go, because it's inevitable that you'll get to a relatively high COI in a dog breed, because dog breeds were all created from a small population, more or less, especially rare ones. Another thing is you could take a dog with a high COI, an inbred dog and an inbred female, but their lines are unrelated, breed them together, and you end up with a very low COI. But in reality, those offspring from that breeding are still very inbred, because both the parents are inbred. So that's something to keep in mind when you're reading about COIs. When you're looking at COIs, always ask how many generations in the pedigree is it based off of, and then when you see a low COI in a breed that probably produces a high COI, ask how did that happen? Are these two unrelated lines that are heavily inbred? So that's where COR, which is coefficient of relationship, becomes a very powerful tool. The COR is essentially a measurement of the relatedness between a group of dogs. So you could take a male and then calculate the coefficient of relationship between that male and a female or another male. It's a rather hard calculation to do. So you don't see it very often. I don't think there's very many online pedigrees that do it. I wrote a pedigree database for the Kai Ken, and I included it. The COI could be calculated instantly, but the COR actually took several minutes for my pretty powerful computer or server to calculate it. So what ended up happening is I had to run it every hour or so, and then update it. It's a hefty calculation, but it's the most, in my opinion, one of the most important calculations. Now with DNA, companies and services out there. I hope you can hear me with this wind. It's just picked up again. With the services like Embark and things like that, optimal selection, they can calculate your CORs and COIs using using what they have in their genetics, their DNA database, which is fantastic. And what you're seeing is a lot of people freaking out because, here they had this dog that had an 8 or 16 generation pedigree, and the COI was, let's say 15%. Well, that wouldn't even work, but whatever. 12.5% or something like that. And then they do an Embark, and all of a sudden they realize they're actually looking at a dog that's like 50% COI. And so I think that the DNA testing is going to kind of rip the Band-Aid off of a lot of things in dogdom. It's gonna hurt some of the breeders for sure, because it's gonna dig up data and information that you may not have known about. So that's what a coefficient of relationship is. It's a percentage of relatedness to a specific dog. So usually you'll ask for the coefficient of relationship of a group of dogs to one single dog. I can, if anyone's curious, I can send or show you a example of that in the Kaiken database. It's still around. So to summarize, COR is much better, but it's harder to calculate and it's rarer to find. COI is not bad. It's a great tool and it's something you should pay attention to. Ghazi, chill out. Anyways, so you should still pay attention to COI. However, pay attention to it, understanding its limitations, is what I'm saying. So let's talk about selection. Everyone knows that, dog breeds exist because of us humans selecting for traits that we want to see. In some cases, there's breeds that are considered natural breeds that are essentially self-selected into a role. Some of the livestock guardians are that example. And people use that term a lot, but no matter what, if humans are, part of the puzzle with breeding the dogs, they're still being, artificially selected, right? They're still being, the humans are still playing a role in selection. Environment plays a role in selection. Everything plays a role in selection. That's called selective pressure, right? So, what I want to say about selection, what I want you guys to keep in mind is that anytime you remove a dog from a breed population because of what you consider to be a fault, you've just shrank that breed's population. Anytime you don't breed a dog for any reason whatsoever, including health reasons, that's selective breeding. And so, standards that ask for specific colors, or judges that prefer specific colors, or breeders that prefer specific colors, or ear sets, or eye shape, or whatever, they're unfortunately doing a disservice to the breed population by selecting for such unimportant traits as color. You could just as easily allow that color in the breed, but prefer another color over it, and you wouldn't be reducing the population just simply because of a color. I'll give an example. The Kishu Ken. So most people know of the Kishu Ken as being a white dog, but in Japan, there's Yoshoku Kishu, which are colored. They're kind of colored like a Shikoku. I made it my effort, my personal task, to bring over Yoshoku Kishu to America because I thought that they would provide some diversity in the very, very small Kishu population here in America. I was slightly wrong about that because the Kishu is the Yoshoku Kishus all appear to be inbred off of like just a couple dogs to keep the color going. So that's kind of, and those same dogs are also producing white dogs, so they're in the white dogs too. So bringing them over really didn't do what I wanted to do. But at the very least, it opened the eyes of Kishu and Japanese dog enthusiasts that there's, they're not all just white. And they can be registered in Japan. Japan did it right, is what I'm trying to say. You can register the Yoshoku Kishu in Japan, and you can show them and all that. You do that knowing that the preferred color is white. So if you're showing up against a white Kishu, unless your Yoshoku Kishu is like freaking amazing, you're probably not going to do as well as the white Kishu. And that's a form of selective pressure. However, at least they didn't say, oh, it can't be in here. any colored Kishu isn't a Kishu and remove it. That would be, doing a disservice to the breed. So I applaud the Japanese for doing that. That's not to say that the Japanese aren't heavily inbreeding. They are very heavy-handed with the inbreeding in these dogs. So that's selection. Let's move on to hyper-selection. I kind of dabbled on hyper-selection. Hold on, I need a drink first. Any dog breed that has like an extreme trait is going to be the product of hyper-selection, right? So a Dane and their height. The only way that those extreme traits continue in a dog breed is through what's called tandem repeat. Is essentially the genetics that create a trait have to be present in order for that trait to happen. And in order to keep that trait in the breed, you have to inbreed on that trait so that those genes are present in every offspring. Some of the traits that we breed for are genetic defects, like short faces and stubby legs and things like that. If you were to start crossing those dogs with other dogs that don't have that genetic trait, you'll lose that trait. So an example is if you take a Corgi and you breed it to a Labrador, you have a 50% chance that the pups are going to have those short, stubby legs. But if you then cross those puppies to another lab or some other breed that doesn't have short legs, you likely will lose the short leg of the Corgi in those further offsprings. And that's because you've basically broken tandem repeat. So hyper-selecting for these extreme traits produces really neat results. Bulldogs, the gameness in pit bulls, in American pit bull terriers, the height of a Dane or wolfhound. These are all like kind of extreme traits that unless you're hyper-selecting for them, they're going to go away. The thick bone of a Caucasian Ovcharka is a great example. There's just a few in history that have had like the thick bone of like Monoma, for example, from Skaro Kennel. Because when you start adding any diversity, you break the tandem repeat and you lose that trait. The Neapolitan Mastiff with its crazy baggy skin. I mean, there's a reason why those breeders breed like, mother to son breedings all the time. I mean, if you look at those pedigrees, they're ridiculous. And that's because you'll lose that silly baggy skin the second you break that tandem repeat and hyper-selection. And so that's all I should say about hyper-selection before I piss off everybody. I wanted to put a thing out there. Carol over at the Institute of Canine Biology, she has a website and she's on Facebook. She has tons of information on this. Really good information. It's a very valuable resource. So if you wanted to learn more and go much more in depth than I have here, I would definitely check her out. That's the Institute of Canine Biology. And I guess this wraps it up. Any questions you might have, you can ask in the comments. Keep in mind, I get a lot of dog questions, and this isn't my bread and butter. Like, I'm a programmer by the day, so I have a job. And so I try to get back to people as fast as I can, but sometimes it takes me a while if my job is really hectic, like it has been the past few months. And yeah, so you can contact me at bradanderson.org. And you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. All of those are listed on my website. And I think what I'll do is I'll add a place on my website for for posting things like links to the Institute of Canine Biology or pictures and things like that kind of go along with these podcasts so that you guys can go there and reference what I'm talking about. I haven't done that yet, but I'll get to that. Next topic, episode 3 will be on the Nihon Ken, the Japanese dogs. I covered some of that today, but I'll cover it more in depth in that one. Hopefully I'll do that in a week. And that's it. Hope you guys all have a nice day.